Well, I want to thank you guys for coming out today. I'm Susan Wolf. I am the administrative assistant here at the Missoula City Cemetery. And about a year and a half ago or so, I was contacted by an author named Jennifer Toelle, and she wanted to know about John Stett. He's our #1 person right here at this sign. She wanted to know about him and wanted to know what we had on him. And so, being always curious about stories, I quickly Googled him into newspapers.com and pulled up all kinds of wonderful things about him. And I told her, I said, well, this is his interment permit. That was the only thing we actually had in the file. I said, but this is what I found about him out on newspapers.com. And then in communication with her, I asked her, well, are you a family member? Because a lot of times we get contacted about people wanting to know about family members and stuff. And I was just curious. So I said, are you a family member? And she's, no, actually, I write historical fiction books. And he's going to play a big part in my book #2. And so I said, oh, and so we started talking, and she told me what her name was and what her first book was, and I went out and got that and read that, and it was really fun. It follows a young woman from Sweden who has come to America to find her mother, who had ran off to America to find her husband, who had ran off to America. So at the age of 16, she comes across the ocean. She gets on she lands in Ellis Island area. She gets off the boat. She takes a train out here to Montana. She gets off, I believe it was in Butte. And she is greeted by a gentleman there who is recognizing that there is a young woman in the late 1800s being unescorted in Montana, and him being a gentleman is, inquired who she was and what she was there for. And he takes her home with him to his house and says, introduces her to his wife and their housekeeper, cook, puts her to work, puts her in school. Long story. We get to book 2. We're still following Sina is her name. And in book 2, she is now here in Missoula. She's a little bit older. She has gotten married. Her husband has deserted her. But so she comes to Missoula with some friends and gets into the vaudeville act. She's introduced into the vaudeville acts and stuff in the theaters. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is the Gem Theater, whose Spider happened to be a bartender at. So the Gem Theater in Missoula is no longer there. It was actually tore down in 1955. I'll hand this around to you. So that is actually the Gem Theater. But John Stett was born in Ireland in September of 1867, and he came to America when he was about the age of 20. And the very first newspaper article that I found of John Spider Stett talks about him being a young gentleman who juggles the festive beer glasses in the Gem Theater, more familiarly known as Spider, which is a nickname that he got because he was a retired boxer, and they called him Spider. But the article was talking about an assault charge on him for getting into a fight in the Gem Theater bar, which a lot of the newspaper articles are about him getting into fights. But he does get into a lot of different scuffles, and in 1902, he actually spent 90 days in jail because he had tried to smuggle in some saws to some other folks to help get them out of jail. So he ended up spending 90 days in jail. But on one of his bonds that he did in 1901, he'd gotten into a scuffle with W. Mason and was charged with assault in the 2nd degree, and his bond was $300, and that was in 1901, which that would be an $11,401.69 bond today. So it was a lot of money, and he paid it. So he had some friends who helped him with that. But in 1903, John Spider Stett actually passed away. He was dangerously ill in July with pneumonia, and he died in August, at the end of August, in the rooms above the Gem Theater where he lived. and he died 35 years old. He was a member of the Order of the Eagles, and the Eagles actually were the ones who arranged his funeral and had him buried here and got him his headstone and stuff. So that is John Stett. The next person we're going to talk about, and my part of the tour is mostly going to be done on the roads. We're not going to actually walk to a whole lot of the graves. We're going to walk along the roads, and I'm going to point them out and we're going to talk about them. And that's just to help keep people moving, and if you've got mobility issues and stuff, hopefully you're not tripping in the grass or anything like that. But the next person that we're going to talk about is William Davenport, and over there is the William Davenport sign, that yellow one there. He actually does not have a headstone. He has what we call a temporary marker here, and I encourage you to walk over to him if you want, but it is, back then the cemetery would, if you didn't have a headstone for a temporary marker, they poured concrete and stamped your name into it in the year. And so the crew has actually dug that up because the cemetery does not necessarily maintain temporary markers, so the grass will grow over it. We have absolutely no unmarked graves out here. If somebody is buried there, there is at least a temporary marker. But William Davenport was born in Boston in 1854, and at the age of 22 he enlisted in the Army, and he actually marched with General Custer through eastern Montana and the Dakotas, and he was a member of General Reno's command when Little Bighorn occurred in June of 1876. And then he was promoted shortly after that to a lieutenant. He spent about 8 years in the Army, and when he retired out of the Army, he, according to his obituary, he was drawn to the vaudeville stage, and he partnered with John Gruen to form a comedic duo act, which was known all over the western states. And they would take their stage success, and they became managers of the Park Theater in Helena, which opened in 1882. And by 1893, Davenport was here in Missoula, and he had married a young lady by the name of Helen, who was also part of a theater group. And later, in 1901, she actually had departed off to Baker City, Oregon, to be part of her theater group and stuff, after coming out here and visiting with her husband for a few weeks. William Davenport was the Gem Theater manager. So he was kind of here in Missoula. He was kind of stuck here. He loved being around the vaudeville acts and whatnot, but he was the manager here. So his wife, who was actually one of the vaudeville actors, she toured around with her group, and so she left him in 1901 for Oregon. Well, in 1904, she filed divorce in Spokane from him, stating that he, for the last 3 years, had not supported her and had deserted her to make her own living. That's what the newspaper article says. Several months later, William actually had a stroke, and as he recovered, the vaudeville family that he had here was they held a huge and very successful fundraiser to help pay for his medical expenses and to help just get him back on his feet. And on December 18th, 1904, William left his rooms, because he also had rooms over the Gem Theater, and he went to dinner across the street at the Success Restaurant. While waiting for his dinner to be delivered to his table, other patrons there saw him slump over and slide to the floor. He had died from a stroke. It was the second one that they said he had had. He was 50 years old. He also was a member of the Eagles, which there's a lot of Eagle members that are buried in this area. So they helped to have him buried here. But his obituary ran all over the United States. It was, I could find it in Georgia, Maryland, Washington, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Alabama, New York, just to name a few of them. He was loved by all that he came in contact with, and he was very much well known and revered amongst the vaudeville acts. So that is what I have on those two folks. So over here we have Charles Hall who's buried over there. And while I know we're keeping to the road, if you guys want to go and check out a headstone, please feel free to do that. That's why we put the signs there. But Charles Humphrey Hall was born in Kentucky on August 12th, 1869, to a pretty prominent old Virginia family. He was the grandson of George Charles S. Marshall, one of Montana's most distinguished jurists, and the nephew of Colonel Thomas C. Marshall, who we'll talk about in a little bit, because he does play a part in the book also. Charles was a smart boy, destined to follow in the family footsteps that led them to the right side of the law. So at the age of 17, he actually came to Missoula and was appointed to the position of deputy clerk for the court. He entered the Montana bar, again, a lawyer, not the bars, but he entered the Montana bar in 1895, and just short of 5 years later, in 1900, he was elected county attorney. In January of 1899, Charles Hall, he married Harriet Moore, and they had 3 daughters. His death came as a shock to many, as he was only 54 years old and had been to the office on Wednesday, just 2 days before he died on Friday, February 23rd, 1923. The papers were full of tributes and messages, such as his friend wrote, Charlie Hall was universally loved and respected by the members of the bar and by all of those who knew him. There was quite a few different ones that they filled up columns in the newspapers, just friends and stuff, talking about how awesome he was, how much he was respected, and that he had a rare gift, a highly developed sense of humor, which was once keen and clean, and which he always made sure to use good use of to lighten the drudgery of everyday toil, even in the courtrooms. So in the book, Charlie Hall is one of the lawyers who prosecutes Franklin Pierce and the Gem Theater. In the 1900s, in the early 1900s, there were some new laws that were coming into play, the wine laws, and trying to close down any establishment where there was an entertainment and alcohol, so gambling, things like that. So Charles Hall was part of that group that was, as the county attorney, he wanted to prosecute. He also was one of the prosecuting attorney for Stet when he went to jail for trying to break people out. So he's tied into them a lot, you'll see. And Jennifer does a really good job on sharing some of those stories in her book. And I'll pass this around as we get a little bit further towards the end. But she does a pretty good job on tying those connections together in real life that were there, and those that she's woven in her historical fiction book. Okay, any questions on Charlie Hall?
It could be partially true that some of the events may correlate to actual people who did live, but history has forgotten them.
Exactly. That's why we're doing this, because at least 11 of these stories are people that we've never told before. So I appreciate that you guys are here to listen to them. We're ready? We're going to move on down the road a little bit further. So out over here, we have the Pierce family, one of the first Pierce families we're going to talk about today. I'm going to move this forward so if anybody needs a chair, feel free to come get one out of here. So Franklin J. Pierce and his family are buried out here. And to quote Jennifer, Franklin Pierce's early life is shrouded in mystery. He was born on November 1st, 1866, and he was named James P. Harshaw. He was raised in Texas, and at a young age, he lost both of his parents, and he was raised by his stepmother. There are rumors going around that he ran away from home to join the circus, probably reflecting his adventurous spirit and natural flair for entertainment and business. One thing led to another. Frank ended up here in Missoula, and he became a very well-known person here in Montana, in both Butte and Missoula. He lived in both, and engaging in theatrical, restaurant, saloon industries for years. He was the owner of the Gem Theater here in Missoula, which the book is actually based around. Most of it happens at the Gem Theater, and it's all about Frank's run-ins with the law, mainly trying to keep it legal. And he was a family man. He actually had been married 3 times, and he had quite a few children, but he was a family person, and his dream was to make the Gem Theater and take the vaudeville act, which up until about that time had been pretty bawdy. But his goal was to make it more family friendly and have a place that people and families could come and enjoy an entertaining show and have a drink if they wanted to and stuff like that, but it wouldn't be what vaudeville acts had up until that time kind of been, very burlesque and things like that. But Frank had several run-ins with the law, like I said, mainly trying to abide by the changing rules of the late 1800s and early 1900s, as there had been a push to close down establishments that were serving alcohol, and he wanted to make that more of that family-friendly sort of culture. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of his history because in the book, Jennifer actually has quite a few pages. She met with his family that are still alive. There's pictures of him. Let me grab the book real quick and I can show that. But there are pictures of him. The family still has his shaving mug and stuff like that. There's a picture of that in here. But there's pictures of him on his porch with his family, with his wife. I'll pass this around. But so I won't go into it terribly because you can read that in here. You can find her book in just about all bookstores, or your independent bookstore can order it for you. But I will pass this around if you wish to look at some of the family photos. They're there in the back. But Frank, the Gem did finally close and he moved back to Butte. And when he passed away, he was living in Butte. He died on December 13th, 1925, and he was survived by his wife, Mary. She was his third wife. She was very much also into the vaudeville acts. But they had 6 sons and 4 daughters still surviving at that time. You'll find over here little Rose Pierce. She was one of the last babies born, and she passed away fairly young, I think at the age of 9 months, and so she's buried over here also in the family plot with them. But that's the Pierce family, and mainly the family that this book is really wrapped around, besides Sina, the character who we follow. In the book 3, it'll take you through more of her life and stuff, but Jennifer did a really good job, I think, tying in the Pierce family, the history of the Gem, and I did pass around the pictures of the Gem Theater that I could find online. It has been torn down, so the building isn't even here anymore. But
what took its place?
They actually tore it down. There was a hotel. Was it the Florence, I think? They tore it down to put in a parking garage.
Oh.
So,
Was that where it was located?
yeah, it was on Front Street. Yep. In 1955. Yeah.
So in other words, anytime you go near a certain parking garage, you're basically in front of the building.
You very well could be. I tried to look it up on a map. I didn't get as much time to spend researching, and I will go down some deep rabbit holes researching things. So I had to pull myself back so I could get a little bit more on everybody else. But okay, we're gonna wander down this way. So straight down this row here of headstones, we have Harry W. Thompson, sorry. He was born in St. John, New Brunswick in Canada in 1867. And in 1886, he followed his brother Tyler Thompson here to Missoula to take a position at the cash desk for the Missoula Mercantile Company. Tyler worked in the grocery department, and Harry was going to be at the cash desk. Now, some of the newspaper articles I've come across actually refer to Harry as Timmy. Apparently that was his nickname. So it was kind of hard to follow along on some of those. But in September of 1890, Harry married Sally Rosenbaum at the Presbyterian Church here. And the newspapers regarding their wedding said that two of Missoula's favorites have wed. Apparently she was very well liked, as well was he. And Harry has his own entertainment story, which I find kind of fun, because Harry became one of the sheriffs. He was elected as the 22nd sheriff of Missoula County, and actually spent 2 years really trying to enforce the social and the alcohol and stuff, those new laws and stuff, the reform that was happening at that time. But Harry had his own entertainment history. In 1894, he was part of a group that was doing a New Year's Eve party sort of thing, celebration, where there were musics and jokes, and apparently he had quite the singing voice, and he sang a solo called Lime Kiln Club. And he also did female impersonations, which is what he became really well known for. In February of 1896, the minstrel show put on, they did a fire department fundraising sort of event, and he was there also. And the newspaper's quote said, "Harry W. Thompson, the famous female impersonator, will bring down the house with his presentation of the Ben Bolt scene from Triboli." So apparently he really enjoyed his own entertainment sort of thing. So I found it kind of ironic that then he became sheriff and worked really hard to help close down establishments that were doing kind of the same sort of thing, but they happened to be serving alcohol. But he was elected sheriff in 1902, and the first day on the job, I mean, I felt pretty bad for Harry actually as I went into his research, because the first day on the job, January 1st, 1903, he gets a letter from Charlie Hall, who's the county attorney, saying you must suppress gambling. So this is the actual newspaper article. I'll pass that around if you want to look at that. So that was what he walked into on his very first day of work. On his fourth day of work, and this is another story that's being told out here today. No, it's not actually. It is a QR code story though that you can see, is Leah Mott's story. So on his fourth day of work, Leah Mott's husband shot and killed her. So that was his fourth day of work. So his 2 years as sheriff were filled with hunting down horse thieves, murderers, taking folks out to Warm Springs or dropping them off at different reform schools, and interrupting attorneys, because Charlie Hall and one of the other attorneys, I found a newspaper article, actually got into a fisticuff in the middle of a courtroom. So they called in Sheriff Thompson. As the sheriff, as he was tasked with enforcing the morale and the social reforms at that time, it wasn't easy for him. And he wasn't able to secure a nomination from the Republican Party for the position of sheriff in the 1904 or the 1905 elections. And he was, however, he secured it for the next round of elections, but he did not win. So he only spent 2 years as sheriff. And after that, he went back to working at the Missoula Mercantile Store, and he went back to doing his female impersonations. He did die at the age of 57. I couldn't find a whole lot of details on him there. And I don't know what happened to his wife. She had, she wasn't listed in the obituary. Another story to go down that rabbit hole. But he was a member of the Knights of Pythiasis and the Elks Club. So they helped to put on his funeral. Okay, any questions?
His grave?
His grave is down, yeah, there's a yellow sign down there. It's down along almost all the way to the end. Any other questions on him? Okay. So here we have Henry C. Stiff. He was born in Illinois on November 19th, 1859. He was married to Cora Compton in 1887. And he was a pioneer lawyer of Missoula and at one time Speaker of the House of Representatives from Montana, and a very prominent person in the Democratic circles. And he when he came here to Missoula, he entered into a law partnership with Thomas C. Marshall, who we'll talk about in a little bit. And this firm became known as one of the most prominent legal practices in Missoula's early history. Henry and Cora both lie right there. I could not find any information on children. His death had declined for many years though, and when he passed away at home on October 16th, 1926, it wasn't a surprise, but many people were very upset about it. He was a very good lawyer, apparently, and very well loved. He was on he sat on the same table with Franklin J. Pierce, who he represented him. Thomas Marshall and Stiff represented Frank Pierce in all of his different adventures and fighting all of the different laws that were coming into place, or all the different fines that they were being put on to them for having gambling and drinking and activities happening in the same place. So fighting those wine laws and the social and moral reform that was happening in the early 1900s. Stiff was one of the lawyers who represented Frank Pierce in that. And I'd love to dig more into his, I just didn't have any time. So there they lie. If you want to see one of the new stories being told this year, Mary Stringham is straight down that way. You'll find her. She is the first white female child born in Montana. Her cousin Jeffrey was the first white child born in Montana. He's also buried out here, but we're not telling his story this year. We're telling Mary's story. So this is A.J. Gibson. He was an architect here in Missoula. He designed, built a lot of historical buildings here in Montana and in Missoula and stuff. You can tell the Gibson rock, that his wife and him have these beautiful rock headstones to represent them. So I won't go into them a whole heck of a lot because you can find a lot of his information out there already.
There was a documentary on TV
Yeah.
not long ago.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
I think the saddest thing about A.J. Gibson is him and his wife were killed on New Year's Eve, crossing a train track. He was partially deaf, did not hear it, and their windows were all kind of iced up, fogged up and stuff in their car, and their car got stuck on the train tracks and they were killed. They were hit and killed by the train. They were the first people in Montana, or in at least here, to own a car. He was very much a car guy, but he built a lot of really cool buildings and stuff. So you can click on the QR code in your packet or out there. I won't spend much more time talking about A.J. Gibson. So right here we have Dr. William P. Mills. His brother was also a doctor and is buried next to him. The newspaper article that I read, I'll start with that. It says, "There is no nobler calling than the physician's. The physician, true to the ideals of his profession and holding to his ethics, must need the soul of honor, the friend and helper of humanity, and a living example of self-sacrifice to his fellow men. Montana lost such a man with the passing of Dr. William Mills." This was one of the articles that was in the newspaper in the Missoulian on December 7th, 1920. Dr. William Parks Mills, Jr., born in Sweet Springs, Missouri, September 27th, 1857, and after graduating the Medical College of New York City, he came to Montana in 1882. He got married and had 2 sons. He was a member of the Oddfellows and the Elks Lodge. And on December 6th, 1920, Dr. Mills died of pneumonia at the Sisters Hospital, now known as St. Pat's. In the book, Reaching for Reveries, Dr. Mills is actually called to the Gem Theater. There are 2 twins that have an act in the book, and one of the twins, she accidentally drinks something for wood tarnish or I don't know. She drank something that she shouldn't have on accident, and he is called to attend to her. I couldn't find that as an actual thing in newspapers and stuff, but I would imagine he was actually called out to a lot of different things. He went where he needed to go when people were ill or needed help. He was definitely one of those old pioneer kind of doctors, and according to the newspaper articles I read, he was very well loved, and all of Missoula was very saddened when he had passed away. So down over here we have George Nink. He was born in 1861, and he came to Missoula in 1890 and became quickly known for serving the finest German deli lunches. He was the owner of the Louvre Saloon. It was located at 117 North Higgins Avenue. And he was the first president of the Missoula Band. So if you're from here and are familiar with the Missoula Band, he was very much a music enthusiast and was the first president for the Missoula Band. And he was a longtime member of the Fraternal Order of Eagles, which did later oversee his funeral. But Nink in the book has a portion, he plays into it because he also has a saloon. And so all of the saloon owners knew each other, and while yes, they were in competition, they also bonded over the fact that new laws and social and moral reform was happening to them and around them. And so they kind of bonded over some of those things. And when George and his wife got married, they got married at Frank and Emma Lichty. They're not buried out here that I could tell, but he was a cigar owner or a cigar roller and owned a cigar shop in town. And so George and his wife got married at their place. And in the book, it's a big scene where Sina and her vaudeville friends all come here to Missoula specifically to go to George's wedding. That's how Sina ends up here in Missoula. So they do have a very big part in the book, even though they're not quite the main characters. So, but they're buried over there. So here we have the Marshall Monument. We have Thomas C. Marshall. This is a picture of him. I'll pass this around if you guys want to see it. So some basic information about him. He was born December 14th, 1851 in Kentucky. He actually died on April 23rd, 1911 in Fargo, North Dakota. He was on his way to receive some treatment and passed away in Fargo. They had his body brought back and interred here. He was one of the pioneer lawyers. He'd come here to Montana and became a lawyer. He also served time as a judge and a local politician here in Missoula. He was part of the Woody and Marshall law firm. So so we've got Sarah Woody over here. Part of her story, I imagine, is talking about her husband, Frank Woody, who was a lawyer. And so his first law firm was with Woody and Marshall. And he served briefly as a Missoula mayor. And I mean briefly. He was the 3rd Missoula mayor. In 1885, he resigned that same year as being elected to it. He was then elected to the territorial legislature, where he chaired the Judiciary Committee. And then he later handled all of the the A and B Hammond Enterprise things. So the Missoula Mercantile Company, the First National Bank of Missoula, the big Blackfoot Milling Company. He served as their lawyer. He also is in the story because he served with Stiff to represent Franklin J. Pierce in their legal endeavors. Thomas Marshall was also one of the original incorporators, trustees of the Missoula Valley Improvement Company, which you guys probably do not realize is who originally purchased the Missoula City Cemetery and had it started. This has been a cemetery since 1884, and Thomas Marshall was one of the original incorporating trustees of that and served on the board. In 1901, the Missoula Valley Improvement Company sold the cemetery to the city for $1 because that's how you do it back then. And we have been a city cemetery ever since. So I am very honored to actually tell Thomas C. Marshall's story because I know it's one that hasn't been told. And the fact that he is tied into who we are here today is so important, I think. So unfortunately, like I said, he did pass away in Fargo, North Dakota, while en route to receive some medical attention. Sorry. But yeah, that's all I've got on him. His story is one that we are going to dig further into so we can have a more complete story to tie it into the cemetery's history and be able to do a little bit better justice to him than what I'm doing right now. So thank you. And we're going to move on over that way a little bit. So down here, on the other side of this crypt here, we have another Pierce family. They were actually not related to Franklin J. Pierce, but because Franklin J. Pierce was married to a woman named Mary, and apparently Percy Prescott Pierce was also married to a lady named Mary, they got confused a lot. They also had sons that were about the same age, and they were both in the entertainment business, I guess you'd say. Percy Prescott Pierce, he was born May 26, 1867 in Minnesota, and he, some say he owned the Missoula Hotel. In the book it says he owned the Missoula Hotel. I could actually only find one thing that kind of linked him to the Missoula Hotel, and that was basically the notice that went out saying that he was leaving Missoula in 1903, and it listed him as the landlord of the Missoula. But I do have evidence that he actually he owned the original Mug, I believe it was called, the saloon. Yes, it was located in the Rankin Block. And he had, like I said, he'd, let me start that over. So when he was born in 1867 in Missoula, he left home around the age of 10, is the best I could find. By the age of 15, he had made his way here to Missoula, and he started working, and he worked really hard. People thought he was a really hard worker, and he had a very good business mind. When he was about 17 years old, he married Alistine Ellen Moore. And in '86, they welcomed their first child into their home. In 1890, in December of that year, he received a letter from his mother who said, "Hey, your father and I and your sister and your brother, we're on the train and we're heading to Tacoma. We didn't stop in Missoula because we weren't sure you actually resided in city. But hey, we're gonna be in Tacoma if you wanna come over and see us, and we're gonna tour along the coast." So he gets this notice and he's like, I'm on vacation. I've built this great saloon. I've got this company. I've done pretty good. He's got a house being designed and built by A.J. Gibson, and he's got a couple of kids now. So he takes off for a couple of weeks and heads out to the coast. He's gone 10 days, and when he comes back, the newspaper actually reported, Percy Prescott Pierce, so all of the newspaper refers to him as P.P. Pierce, returned yesterday afternoon from his trip west to see his parents and his family. He found them at Tacoma and went as far as Portland with them. Pierce says he is glad to be back in Missoula weather, that it rained nearly every day in Washington and Oregon, and that he only caught one glimpse of the sun while away for only a few hours in Portland. So I am from Washington. I can attest that that probably actually happened. Him and his wife had a couple of more kids. They ended up with 4 children. He actually had his wife in 1894, sorry. They welcomed their 4th child, who was a 10-pound baby boy. He was very happy. However, shock and sorrow struck the Pierce family at 9 o'clock in the morning, just about 6 days later, when Mrs. Pierce passed away due to complications from birth. She was a mere 28 years old and left 4 children, Cora, who was 9, Jesse, who was 8, Frank, and the new baby, Elsie. Later that year, in May of that year, Percy sends his 2 daughters to Tacoma to go live with his mom out there for a while. And then there is newspaper articles that report that Cora, the oldest one, was passing through Missoula on her way to Minnesota, where his parents actually lived. She was going back to Minnesota to finish up her schooling. She was only 9 years old when her mom passed away. I could not find any evidence as to what happened to Jessie. The newspaper articles doesn't mention that Jessie is with her sister going to Minnesota, and I so far haven't found them being linked anywhere else. The 10-pound baby boy passed away several months later, and he is buried out here next to Percy. In the newspapers, Pierce does remarry, and he moves his family to Spokane in 1903, where he actually lives and works for another 30 years. And when he passes away in what year did he pass away? Sorry. When he passed away in, I don't have his death date on here. I'm so sorry.
It's listed here at 1934.
Okay, 1934. Thank you. My notes sometimes. In 1934, when he passed away, his family brought him back here and placed him with in the family plot where they had placed little Elsie. But Pierce has a pretty good point in the book, because Franklin J. Pierce's family was always getting confused with the Percy Pierce's family, and he also owned a saloon, the old original Mug, so they had those links together. The Yerricks are down over there. Yerrick. William Yerrick and his 19-year-old daughter Zetta. So I was very excited to find out when I found out that William Yerrick's story is part of Reaching for Reveries, because I personally, I have a connection to him. So this picture here, I was going to bring this today. It hangs in my dining room, but the moment I took it off the wall, it actually kind of came apart a little bit. So, yes. So I found this picture in Anacortes, Washington, probably 25 years ago. It's very nicely done. It was mounted. It's in a nice frame and everything. And I was very excited about it. I just loved the picture. I loved the context of it. It's from 1896. It's a little risque. It's kind of fun. And when I moved here to Missoula, I hung it in my dining room. And then when I started working out here, I'm like, oh my goodness. The guy who owned the Garden City Bottling Company is buried here in Missoula City Cemetery. His name is William Yerrick. And I will pass this around. On the back, there is an actual picture of the bottling company. It was out on the hills out I believe I-90 now runs over it. They did tear it down. Where did my stuff go? So William Yerrick was a native to Ashland, Ohio. He was born in Ashland County, Ohio, and he arrived in Missoula in 1888, and he first worked in the transportation business, running a buggy operation with W.H. Straub, who's another story we need to tell someday. He later became proprietor of the Garden City Bottling Company and was very instrumental in developing the corner of Cedar and Stevens Street. Though once married and had a daughter, he did experience a lot of personal loss and a lot of separation. So his daughter was born. Her name's Winzetta. She's buried out here beside him. She had a heart problem, and for her health, her mother and her traveled around to different places trying to get help for her, and just to get to a different location where perhaps the elevation wouldn't affect her heart as bad. They ended up in Oregon, and she was doing pretty good for a few months, and so William was actually going to rent out the house that they had just had built here in Missoula and move to Oregon to be with his wife and his daughter. Zetta passed away. She was 19 years old, and shortly afterwards, William and his wife divorced. Carrie was her name. So that was one of his losses, one of his separations. He also had built a very large company, and he supplied a lot of the liquor to a lot of the different saloons that we talked about. He got himself in trouble a lot. There's a lot of different newspaper articles about him out there. But he also was a very wise and respected for his whiskey knowledge during different times when they were trying to crack down on alcohol. There was a lot of deaths happening due to basically people drinking poison because it wasn't whiskey. And he was actually called in on a couple of different court cases where they were trying people who had served bad alcohol, and he was giving his knowledge and his opinion that no, this is actually poison, not alcohol. So so he was called in on as one of the, on the prosecuting side.
Know what I'm doing.
Exactly. So, but his daughter Zetta was very well liked in this community, and the newspapers, there was a lot of different articles that were written about her and stuff too. And one of them that is in the book here, this is actually, Jennifer does a really good job on pulling actual newspaper clippings and putting them into the book. But this one here, this is supposed to be in Sina's journal. And she's talking about Zetta, and she says, I have clipped this one because its words are so beautiful. Finding some solace from the pain, the best portion was, and in quote, in youth we cling to life. We are terrified at the very thought of personal dissolution. The youthful tenacity of life is like a green apple that clings to the branch and cannot be plucked thence except by breaking the twig on which it grows. Old age, on the other hand, has lost its strong attachment to life. It is like the ripe apple in autumn. You touch it and gently it drops freely into your hand. To sleep, perchance to dream, age, there's the rub. Yet bright things never die, even though they fade. So that was in the Weekly Missoulian, May 8th, 1903, and the author was writing about Zetta Yerrick. So that...
So very true.
Yep. So that is all I have today. I'm hoping that you guys enjoyed it. I highly encourage you to find Reaching for Reveries is the second book in this particular tour, or in this particular series, about a young lady named Sina who comes from Sweden in search of her family and then finding herself. You can find it at Books and Noble here. Your local independent bookstore can order it up, and in your booklet there, I have actually provided you with Jennifer's website to where if you wanted to purchase it that way. So
Thank you.
thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh.